Hi everybody. Before this session starts, I want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Liz Jackson, and I have been working with South by Southwest for the past 2 years to make South by and hopefully other events and conferences more accessible. So I passed out some cards, some of you got them. We created a transcription app, it's called Thisn, Thisten. It's available on iOS and Android if you want to download it, and you can follow along in real time. There's also, you can pull direct quotes from it, and you can post on social media or send to your friends, and you can also comment directly in the app if you want to engage at all. We were, just a little bit of background, we transcribed all of the accessibility sessions in this room and the room next door yesterday and today, and this is our final one, so thank you guys very much.
All right, so shall we go ahead and get started then? Yeah. That sounded like a yes. All right, awesome. So how's everyone doing today? Yay! Fantastic. I'd say raise your hand if you're doing all right, but that wouldn't do me a whole lot of good. And that brings me to my intro. My name is Michael Espinosa, and I am totally blind. I have been blind since birth with a condition called LCA, or Leber's congenital amaurosis. Basically, it is a deterioration of the retina. So before I get into all of the fun parts about that, what I'd like to go ahead and start with is a question for everyone, kind of a rhetorical question. How many of you remember your first teacher?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah? How many of you remember the first thing your first teacher ever said about you, about what they expected of your abilities and such? No? Not so much? I remember the first thing my teacher ever said about me. I didn't actually hear it, but I heard it from my mom later, because she was not super happy with it. So when I was born blind, my parents faced the decision, how do we parent this? Do we shelter and protect and isolate? Or do we push them into the real world, me and my sister, who's also blind? Do we push them into the real world? Do we get them educated faster and more rigorously so that they can keep up with their sighted peers? Luckily for me, they took the second route. And that is how I ended up in an early childhood program when I was about 2 years old. At that time, I met a teacher who assessed my abilities, and within the first week of knowing me, assured my mother that I believe her exact words were, cognitively stunted. I would never be able to so much as take a step on my own, despite the fact that I was already walking. I would never be able to form a cohesive thought or a complete sentence. I would never be able to repeat words that were not my own, they were all just be parroted words from other people. Now, to be fair to me, that sounds like your average 2-year-old. They parrot things because they don't know things yet. Sounds like a 2-year-old and or a politician, I don't know which. But either way, it seems about right. All I know is that I'm taking some steps. I'm taking steps, I'm walking, and I'm talking. And these are actually my own words. So I think she was wrong. That's my consensus. I think she was wrong. Now, the reason I bring that up is because that set a bar for me. A really, 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 really low bar for me that I was determined to never limbo under, no matter how easy it would have been to give up. I mean, someone had basically handed me a get out of trying anything difficult ever free card when I was 2 years old. From then on, it would have been very easy for me to not try because a teacher had said that I cognitively could not try. So I didn't do that, and my parents didn't let me do that. My mom was upset for sure, but she and my dad resolved that one teacher's opinion didn't necessarily dictate my entire life. Luckily, they were right. By kindergarten, I was on a 6th grade reading level. I read all of the books in Braille that our district had to offer, so they had to start shipping out other books from other districts and from other libraries so that I would have Braille books, which is why in 3rd grade, while other kids were reading Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I was reading Ian Fleming's James Bond series. Suffice it to say, I was the only 3rd grader excited about reading time. But all of that leads up to why I'm here today, which is video games. I started playing video games when I was probably about 6 years old. My grandmother had a Sega Genesis. My grandmother didn't play the Sega Genesis. She had it at her house on one of the TVs in the house. My dad's side of the family is from Mexico. They all moved here to Texas, and they have a wonderful little house, which is exactly what one might expect. That is to say, it's all of our relatives crammed into one awesome little house with 3 or 4 TVs going at once, all playing different sports in Spanish. And it's great, and I couldn't ask to have grown up and spent more time in a more awesome and encouraging environment. But on one of those TVs was a Sega Genesis. We actually don't know who owned it. It just kind of ended up hooked up to that TV. I'm sure it was one of my cousins. But we started playing video games there. Now, I wasn't always as great at video games on the Sega Genesis. There were a lot of, very timing-oriented, jumping kind of games and such that weren't really an option for me or were really kind of hard for me to do, but I realized that if I kept trying, I could start learning where my character had failed, where I died, and using sound effects to remember the locations of items and levels or jumps or things like that. So I could use timing and memory to pick up where vision had left off. Now, that led me ultimately into getting my own game system when I was 7. My parents bought me a Sony PlayStation. I remember it was my 7th birthday. It was so exciting because all of the other kids were sitting around, at my house for a big birthday party. We were opening the box, and all the kids kept saying, "Oh my goodness, it's a PlayStation, it's a PlayStation." And I mean, I'm blind, so I'm not seeing that it's a PlayStation. I'm like, nah, they're wrong. My parents said, "Why would they buy me a PlayStation? That's crazy." Turns out it was a PlayStation. And it was awesome, and I was super hyped about that. I immediately became enamored not just of gaming, but specifically fighting games. Fighting games being specifically the type of game where it's a one-on-one type of setup, where you move in either a 2D or 3D environment, but it's one player versus one player in a very direct competitive setting. A lot of punching, blocking, throwing, etc., to put a fairly simple spin on the very complex world of fighting games. I became hooked on these because they became a test of skill for me. Every game was a test of skill, but a lot of them were a test of memory. Fighting games became a test of reaction, of listening, of understanding. I could hear when a character blocked and my weapon or my fist did not strike them but struck their blocking motion. I could tell when a move hit and when I could seamlessly segue into another move in what's known as a combo. I could tell when characters were thrown from the edge of the arena, or in games with good stereo, I could tell when characters switched sides, so I knew if I was on the left or the right of the screen at any given time. That's very important in fighting games because directional inputs allow you to know which moves you're doing at which times. If I'm on the left side of the screen, I might have to press right and an attack button to do a move, whereas if I'm on the right side of the screen, I may have to press left and that same button, because it's all about where you are relative to your opponent. As you can imagine from that, sound is absolutely important. Hearing whether I'm on the left or the right is the difference between whether or not I win or lose. And I took to those games. For some reason, the muscle memory of learning moves, of learning combos, of learning to navigate these complex, rapid-fire matches just really clicked with me. It was like playing chess, but on rapid fast forward, because every move you made opened up new possible moves, new counter moves for your opponent, and thus opened up even more moves for you. It was like an infinite super chess of some sort, played at an incredible speed, and I couldn't get enough of it. I started off playing a game called Star Gladiator, a shameless Soul Calibur / Star Wars knockoff, and playing against my dad, and losing badly every time. But I got better each time, and I started losing a little less badly each time because I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to say, oh, this game isn't for me. These games aren't something I can do. They're just beyond me. I've never been comfortable admitting that something is beyond me, chiefly because I haven't really found anything that I can't do if I try hard enough, whether it's learning to play fighting games, whether it's learning the art of picking locks. I'm a big fan of lock picking recreationally. I have my lock picks in my pocket right here. Lock picks, yo. You never know when you're going to need them, believe me. Whether it's that, whether it's playing games, whether it's shooting guns. I love going to the shooting range. In fact, I'm going hunting this weekend. Whether it's skydiving. playing music, anything like that. I need to try new things, develop new hobbies, and try to get as good at them as possible. That's just been my nature. My parents never, they never made me feel pressured, but they never let me settle for less than my best, because they always knew what I was capable of. And they always encouraged me because of that, for which I'm infinitely grateful. Now, as far as fighting games go, and gaming in general, it did become a very important part of my life. The stories in games, all of the relationships between characters and how they interact and how your role as the player influences those stories, even in fighting games, was a very powerful thing for me. It's probably one of the biggest things that inspired me to get my degree in English and writing and to publish a book, which I did back in 2015. It was a fantasy novel inspired by my favorite author, Robert Howard. But I don't think I would have done that without video games and the narratives that they tell. And without video games, I don't know that I'd be exactly the same person I am today. Unfortunately, when I was 9 years old, I was the victim of childhood abuse. Not by any family member, but by a family friend for a period that went on over a year. And video games were an escape for me. They were a thing that helped me feel like I still had agency, like I still had potential, and like I still had something worth doing. And so for a long time, after experiencing abuse, having video games and something there for me that I could still be good at made me feel like a worthwhile person. I think we all need something that makes us feel like a worthwhile person, abuse notwithstanding, and video games were a phenomenal outlet for me. Not just an outlet for aggression or anything like that, but an outlet for feeling powerless or feeling unworthy or feeling like you don't have anything to offer the world, which is unfortunately the way being disabled and being abused can leave a person feeling sometimes. Our world isn't built for the disabled, and I think we take great steps towards changing that every day, but it still isn't universally accessible. And so I think sometimes it's hard for disabled people to realize that, hey, we have a place in the world and we can do a lot within it. And I think for me, video games were a wonderful way to remind me that I absolutely can do things within our world and I should keep trying. Now, I really got into competitive gaming more recently. I loved playing fighting games and just competing with friends, but I really started getting serious about competition and playing online and really trying to rack up the points when I started playing games like Mortal Kombat. The reason for that being that in the later Mortal Kombat games, 9 and 10, developed by NetherRealm Studios, the sound engineering was absolutely phenomenal. And this is something I really wanted to touch on today, the importance of sound and accessibility in games. The sound in Mortal Kombat is designed with very well-panned stereo, so it's not all pushed to the center. You can hear when your character's on the left or on the right, but you can also hear how far left and how far right based on the volume and pitch of the sounds. You can hear when projectiles are moving from one side of the screen to the other, or when footsteps are moving forward or backward, or things like that. All of these tiny little details, they're accessibility features without even meaning to be. And I think that's a big deal for developers, designers, anyone who works with anything that they could be made accessible, I think can take note of that, even if you're not making a video game, is that not every feature has to be designed with accessibility in mind for it to end up being accessible. I don't think that in Mortal Kombat they designed it to say the names of the characters out loud when you select them. I don't think they designed that so that blind people would know which character they're picking, but it worked. And I don't think they designed it deliberately to, when you finish a round and you're about to beat a character, to trigger the fatality sequence in Mortal Kombat. I don't think they designed that with the announcer's voice shouting, "Finish him!" I don't think they designed that so that blind people would know when to trigger the fatality, but it works. And those are things that absolutely can be applied in other situations. Maybe not necessarily the fatalities, but you can apply the concept. The fact that little details can be added to anything and make it more usable for everyone is, I think, such a core component of accessibility. I think people get scared away of accessibility sometimes because they hear it and they think, oh, I have to rebuild my program from the ground up for blind people or deaf people, or oh, I have to redesign my whole business or building or something for these people. So that's a lot of work and I don't really want to do it. And I understand, it is a lot of work to imagine building something from the ground up all over again. That actually sounds awful, but a lot of the times you don't have to. There are smaller changes that can be made that make things accessible and that make things usable for everyone. And then moving forward, when you start building something new, if you build it from the ground up with that knowledge in mind, then you don't have to make those changes in the future. Because universal design, the concept of things being built from the ground up with everyone in mind, is a natural evolution of thinking about accessibility in things that already exist today. Little things like in Mortal Kombat, for instance, they have a little sound that plays toward the end of a round, just a little chime that will play either on the left or right to let that player know they have only one hit left. If they take one more hit, they are going to lose that round. Now that was originally designed with competitive players in mind. It was designed so that competitive players wouldn't have to keep this perfectly close eye on their health meter while also watching what their opponent was doing. They could get that feedback from sound. But there's another group of players who also don't watch what their opponent's doing. And those are players like me who are totally blind. And that sound ended up being incredibly helpful for us, knowing when we could only take one more hit or when we only had to land one more hit to defeat our opponent. That was absolutely crucial. And when NetherRealm Studios learned that blind people benefited from that, they left that feature in future games, and they added even more. In their latest Injustice game, there are specific settings for visually impaired people where you can turn on different beeps and sounds to let you know when different meters are filling up for your character to do super attacks or things like that. So all they had to do was throw in a few extra beeps and boops here and there, and suddenly this game is even more playable for blind people. It wasn't a complete reinvention of the wheel. It was just adding a little bit of extra features to it, for lack of a better word. And I think that is where accessibility shines. There are tiny changes that have a huge impact. And from now on, when they make a game, they don't have to add those changes retroactively because they know how well they worked, and they can build the game with those changes in mind in the first place. I think that is crucial to universal design because that can be applied to computer programs, that can be applied to workplace environments, to any little thing you can think of, to building design, to any sort of development. It is absolutely something that can be done. Modify what you have now to make it accessible and learn from those modifications so that they're built in, that they're essential components to your next project. And that's how universal design is going to happen, in my personal opinion and in my experience. Now, moving forward from that, I continued competitive gaming with a lot of help from my sighted friends. They would sit down with me and help me learn the sounds. So in the audience here today is my fiance, Kelsey, and she is awesome. She plays fighting games with me every day. We'll sit down, we'll go into training mode in a fighting game. We'll turn it on so both of us are in training mode at the same time, so we can both play against each other without winning or losing rounds, just for practice. And we'll sit there and I will hit moves. I will press a punch button and I'll hear what it sounds like when it hits her character. She'll press a punch button. I'll hear what it sounds like when it hits my character. I'll block a punch. She'll block a punch. I'll hear those sounds. I'll practice the timing for counters and throws in different games to learn when I need to hit these buttons after I hear these sounds in order to avoid taking damage. And we'll sit there for hours practicing what does it sound like when my character walks backwards? What does it sound like when they move forward? What about when they jump? Or when they miss a punch? Or when they charge up an attack? Or when her character does any of those same things? And we'll sit there and we'll do that over and over and over again until I'm confident that I can hear that in a fast-paced setting. We start picking up the speed. She starts mixing it up, throwing different attacks, doing different things, and I start reacting to them, learning piece by piece, bit by bit, what every sound in a game sounds like. If that sounds tedious to you, you're absolutely right. It is, and it's amazingly fun, and it's one of my favorite bonding experiences with my fiance. And because of that, I can absolutely wreck people online because they don't know how I do it, and it's awesome. They don't know when they see someone who openly admits over the mic chat that I'm totally blind. They figure they've got an easy win coming, and it is just devastating when it doesn't turn out that way. And I make sure that they know exactly how devastating that is because I let them know and remind them that I'm blind while they're losing. I'm a good sport like that. I'm a nice guy, as it turns out. But it's so important to have people who support you. The takeaway from this is not just that I'm a troll. The takeaway from this is that it's so important to have people who support you. Could I have learned all of those sounds on my own and learned each game on my own with all of those sounds? Yeah, probably. Probably would have taken about twice or thrice or whatever the ICE word for 10 times as long is, but I could have done it. But having someone or someones, many people who support you and are willing to sit down and practice with you every day, that's what turns a tedious slog into a fun journey and learning experience where you both get better. When I first played fighting games with Kelsey, it was on one of our first dates, and she'd actually never even heard of a fighting game. She didn't know what we were doing when we started playing. I was absolutely baffled as to why we were just beating on each other inside of an arena and there was nothing going on inside the game besides that. And then she learned, and she became amazingly good and motivated me to get amazingly good so I could stop getting my butt kicked by my fiance at Tekken 7. But that's how we both grew. She learned fighting games from the ground up, and I learned fighting games without a sense of sight. So we both enriched each other's lives through that bonding experience. To me, that's accessibility, that's universal design, and that's support. That's two allies working together to make both of their lives better. And because of that, I'm able to compete online. I'm able to hold my own, and not just hold my own, but hold the victory when I take on a sighted person in a match. And really, that seems to blow people's minds, and I love that. I have so much fun when I delight people with the fact that I'm blind and still winning. It's really great. It's a really good feeling. Not just because I think it's surprising. It's not like, oh, well, I'm blind, so it's really surprising that I'm winning. It's, I know I'm blind, and I know I can win. That's not surprising to me. What it is I love being able to teach other people that blind people, that all disabled people are just as capable given the right situations. If a playing field is made level, we can do what others can do. And for me, it's not just a gloating moment when I win. It's a moment where I've hopefully educated someone a little bit and made them realize, wow, this guy, despite having perhaps a slightly different acuity than I in the sight department, can absolutely do what I can do. And I think that is so very valuable in the world of gaming and in the world of everyday life. Because in gaming, it teaches game developers that there is a whole market of blind and disabled folks who will absolutely play your games if they're made accessible. And in the world of everyday life, it teaches people that the disabled are just like them, and that you can absolutely have conversations with us and talk directly to us and speak to us as though we are human beings, because we are on your level as it happens. And that is what I hope I teach people when we go a few rounds on Soul Calibur 6 and I actually end up winning. Or when we play Street Fighter and they don't know how I'm managing to land a reversal on moves that I don't see. And it helps people realize that things that they don't know are possible are absolutely possible. So for me, that is one of the biggest benefits of gaming, is it allows me that chance to teach people about what the disabled can do.